Let's begin with the original source. Trump, from the podium, promises to expel from the country those who applied for and received citizenship and then deceived America. Here, listen for yourself.
We will also revoke the citizenship of any naturalized immigrant from Somalia or anywhere else who is convicted of deceiving our citizens. We'll get them out of here quickly.
So, on January 13th, Tuesday, in a speech in Detroit, Trump announced that a decision had been made to revoke the citizenship of those who deceived the United States government after obtaining citizenship. Well, that means fraudsters, thieves, Somalis, or Jews from Ukraine, or Moldovans from, Moldova, will be sent back to the countries from which they came to the United States according to their documents. I immediately remembered the favorite activities of our immigrant community. Trump didn't say that only cases from recent years would be subject to review. And if there was collusion, then it's not just 5 years of liability for the crime. If it's collusion, for example, theft usually carries up to 5 years. But if, for example, it's with government programs like Medicare, Medicaid, insurance, doctors, or medical services, then it's ongoing. Article 18 of the Criminal Code, Sections 1347 and 1349 sets a 10-year statute of limitations. But if there were tax write-offs or reports, or let's say the sale of a business, which is based on income, and the income included amounts received from criminal activity, then the 10 years are counted. From the date of filing these papers or selling the business or submitting any documents that include these illegally obtained amounts, our so-called civilization, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, and then, so to speak, Ukraine, Russia, and so on, yes, that's well known. For example, the creation of medical offices that build insurance companies and government programs for unnecessary and completely unprovided services with fake diagnoses and so-called conveyor processes. Intermediaries were used to find potential clients and patients. Some of it was organized like staged accidents, and the whole chain, doctors, lawyers, victims, all got a share of the stolen money, and patients were trained what symptoms to report. There was a lot of cashing out and transferring money through front people in so-called foreign countries. Massive numbers of traffic accidents were staged involving their own drivers and lots of passengers. There were staged incidents involving everyone from children to pensioners with mass casualties, demands to insurance companies, and claims for outrageous amounts of money. These so-called victims were treated in their own clinics, where the volume and cost of treatment were inflated. Naturally, we provided fake injuries, so to speak, using the same x-ray of someone's broken leg over and over. Then, so to speak, 20, 30, even 50 people used a lot of money. Our immigrant community made money on fuel schemes, buying subsidized or tax-exempt fuel and then reselling it through regular channels, so to speak, and pocketing all sorts of profits. They're called taxes and excise duties. Yes, excise duties. They sold it in regular places, pretended to collect taxes and excise duties, but kept the money for themselves. In a number of cities, there was a connection with Russian criminal groups, so to speak, from Mother Russia, well organized, which cooperated with the Federal Security Service. The KGB guys, yes, so they were not only involved in fraud, but at the same time they were spying and also recruiting the people they caught doing something. They'd say, Vasya, either serve 15 years in an American prison or work with us. In the 2000 SA scheme involving about 100 people from the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics was uncovered in New York. These were doctors, clinics, physical therapists, lawyers, auto mechanics, who siphoned off $279 million from insurance companies. There were 10 doctors, 9 clinics, and various intermediaries, mechanics, and assistants. In Brooklyn, the owner of Bay Medical Service, Bay Medical Clinic. Yes, that's how Irina Shelikova became a famous person here in emigration through front doctors. She stole a little $77 million from Medicare. I don't know how many more people stole along the way, but she specifically took $77 million, got 15 years in prison, and I think she returned most of that stolen money. I was on that side in 90s New York. A group of Russian immigrants, through fake companies and bogus deals, basically hid $140 million in excise taxes and other taxes. So from a volume of about $500 million worth of fuel, that means they stole $140 million in the United States of America even before Mondale. Fraud involving prescriptions and a network of pharmacies all across America. So the organizers came from Russia, already, so to speak, trained, already, so to speak, smart. They robbed America of $10.6 billion using the Medicare and Medicaid systems. Well, here, on our side, one person has been arrested. I don't know, the case isn't over yet, so I don't know how many more they'll catch from abroad, or if they'll catch any at all. Well, of course, if it goes towards the Russian government, then they won't catch anyone, they just won't catch them there. So the Somalis aren't the first, but it seems like they're almost the most prolific and the loudest. That's the thing, because the White House is paying close attention to them now. Similar cases are starting to be pulled out of the archives and re-examined. In every state, there will be someone who wants to stand out and get a reward. What kind, you might ask? And here, as Misha, that very Robichev, said, the dog sniffed it out, so how exactly did it happen? The thing is, the informant who comes with this case, well, the official might go to his son-in-law or father-in-law and say, listen, come over. Look, I found this. Yes, he can get 15-20, but mostly 15% of the total amount recovered, meaning what was stolen plus the fine. If the informants themselves hire, this is allowed here, if they hire lawyers and win the case and return the money to the state, then they get up to 30% of the amount returned to the state. Again, these are, so to speak, fines. Not just the amount that was stolen itself, but everything that is accumulated on top of it. In other words, you report someone, but you need to have some evidence, not just say, Vasya Petrov is a thief. No, you have to bring something and put it on the table. If the government decides to recover this money and actually does it, then most likely you'll get 15. Amazing, but if you go to court yourself, after notifying the government that you'll handle it on your own and you win the case, then you get 30, let's say from theft or fraud. Let's calculate. Suppose someone committed a $10 million fraud. You've heard of other amounts, 170 million, 9 billion, etc. So say someone committed a $10 million fraud and you exposed it and returned the money. If you only reported it, it's 1.5 million. Solving the case gets you 3 million. Well, without investing any money, or maybe you'll go make some kind of deal with the lawyers, returning money to the state lets you get a reward. For example, return 10 million and you get 3 million. That's great. So those who are proven to have committed fraud, if they're not born citizens here, but got citizenship through so-called naturalization, then they, after they've served their sentence and taken as much money as possible from them, they put them on a plane and send them back to where they came from. Armenia, Romania, Kazakhstan, I don't know, maybe Lithuania, depending on where the individual and his family came from, to the United States of America. By the way, the family isn't required to go. Dad, you go. We'll stay. We like it here, even without you. That's quite an interesting perspective. So let's get back to Minnesota and the Somalis, because that's what's relevant right now. How did they steal $9 billion or more? And how did it happen that the governor of Minnesota? Well, he doesn't chase after this himself, but that's what he's a leader for, so that there aren't any oversight organizations. Those who investigate there found that $9 billion vanished from the budget. That's a huge amount. Yeah, so the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis, where most of this is happening, and the state attorney general didn't stop it. This looting lasted 7 years. The United States Congress started to listen.
As I said on Monday, let him go. Governor Walz is on his way, but he won't be able to avoid responsibility for the alleged $9 billion in fraud. How did this happen, and where the hell were the media? Twin Cities, Start Tribune is involved in this. They've known about this story for years if you just found out about it and refused to report anything about it. In fact, they keep trying to cover it up. Minnesota Republicans have demanded answers and accountability for years but received nothing. From Walz, his administration, Democrat colleagues such as Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, Ilhan Omar, Angie Craig, or the Star Tribune. Thank God for President Donald J. Trump for finally bringing attention to this important issue. Representative Rarick, I'll begin with you. You've worked on this issue for years and spoken directly with whistleblowers, correct?
That's correct.
You know that 1,000 whistleblowers running accounts on X have come forward to expose fraud in Minnesota state agencies, and they were completely ignored by Tim Walz. And they were even persecuted. That's true.
I got another message this morning.
1,000 people appealed to the governor with information about deception, forgery, and fraud. At best, they were ignored, and at worst, they were persecuted.
Well, in your experience, are these statements credible or are they politically motivated against Walz?
They are credible and unbiased.
Really? Many of them are Walz administration staff, right? They are, right?
They are also Democrats.
Can you quickly give one example of the persecution these people faced?
Yes, I can. In my opening statement, I mentioned that the harshest thing was that they would be fired for cause, so they couldn't receive unemployment benefits, and that they would be blacklisted by all government institutions. And I'm willing to bet that this also includes Hennepin and Ramsey counties, since, as you know, they're run by Democrats, and there's much, much more.
Based on your data, Representative, over the past few years, do you doubt that Governor Tim Walz knew about this fraud while it was happening?
He absolutely knew this was happening.
These are representatives of the opposition in the state of Minnesota, meaning they are either Republicans or independent citizens of the state, and, by the way, maybe even Democrats who are just fed up with all of this.
Over 80 autism centers in Minnesota are under investigation. That's true. I believe so. Clearly, someone is criminally involved. You can't just let that amount of money leave your administration over the course of 7 years without knowing about it. The state held hearings on the fraudulent housing stabilization program. But before these hearings, Governor Walz fired the official who was supposed to testify so they couldn't give evidence and expose what was happening under Governor Walz's supervision. Did Governor Walz or Attorney General Ellison fire anyone else? As you know, Representative.
To my knowledge, no, and it was Eric Rumdahl. His administration says he wasn't fired, but I believe he was because it seemed too convenient.
So, Representative Katzen, is it true that 90 people have been charged? And regardless of what your colleague from the committee just said, quoting his facts and figures, 90 defendants or suspects in the $250 million COVID fraud case under the Feeding Our Future program are of Somali origin. I believe that's correct. Are you aware that in a 2021 video, Mr. Ellison promised that he would obstruct his own agency's investigation into Somali fraud? I am well aware of that, and it's no surprise that criminals in the Somali community felt completely immune from punishment while stealing taxpayers' money. I'll ask you what I asked Marion. Do you have any doubts that Tim Walz knew about this fraud while it was happening? None at all? Walz and Ellison intentionally defended the fraudsters rather than investigating them. It's no coincidence this mostly happens in the Somali community. Walz turned Minnesota into a sanctuary state. He gave illegal immigrants free health care, free higher education, and free driver's licenses. And Walz turned a blind eye when Somali immigrants were stealing. Representative Robbins, do you have any doubt that Tim Walz knew about this fraud while it was happening? Absolutely not. So the three of you have no doubt that Tim Walz knew about the $9 billion fraud during his time as governor and did nothing about it? It looks like my time is running out. I want to say to all of you on behalf of Minnesota, thank you for being here and for your fairness.
There will be thousands of appeals, the persecution of those who tried to stop the fraud, while all those who facilitated, covered up, basically protected it. So in Russian, it turns out they are members of the same criminal gang, which calls itself the Democratic Party of America, or the organized crime group Dem Party. You could say the communo-fascists of Minnesota, the communo-fascists of Maine, the communo-fascists of California, Iowa, or Connecticut. They're everywhere. Because we've already been told that since the hearings began, there's been a stream of outraged citizens, Republicans, Democrats, from almost every state where the Democrats, the Democratic Party, are in charge. And I think there are 24 out of 50 like that. 26 are Republican. I might be wrong, but I think it's 24 to 26. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's interesting that in New York, California, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, they're not reporting about Somalis or Venezuelans, not about Puerto Ricans or Mexicans, who, by the way, don't get involved in such things. Yes, so a line of people reporting informing in Russian, they say snitching. There's a negative connotation, but in this case, I support them snitching. Otherwise, not everyone would get caught. They went. And they're not talking about crimes committed by Somalis, but about crimes committed by people from Europe, mostly from Eastern European countries, so congratulations on that. The American people have actually become furious and started venting their anger at the FBI. Where else, as they say, could they vent it? Well, generally speaking, people usually don't go to the police for these kinds of cases, not to the fraud department anyway. There is such a department, including fraud involving the police, insurance, and cyber manipulation, and all sorts of scams related to immigration, fake marriages, forged documents, and fraud involving documents sent from abroad. If before the locals knew about something like this, they would just think, well, it's nothing special. But now, in the hysteria that's just beginning, the Republicans will keep beating the drums nonstop until the elections, and this hysteria will only grow. So many small-time cheaters or those who think they've escaped justice, fraudsters, will get caught in the net. By the way, personally, I believe that the fewer crooks there are living in America, the easier it will be for the mayor of capitalism to breathe. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's wrap it up here and see you next time.